Prof. Yao, welcome to In Conversation.
Thank you.
Do you think that the slowdown in the Chinese economy is due to some fundamental reasons, or is it really just the impact of the COVID-19 lockdowns?
Well, I don't think it's because of long-term issues. In the long run, the Chinese economy performs quite well. Over the last decade, the Chinese economy has gone through huge restructuring, and most of the companies have turned the investment from financial assets, housing markets toward the so-called the real economy. And I have seen many companies that have become so-called hidden champions. That is, their output the largest in their division or market, and they have the highest technology in the world. Right? The recent slowdown has been caused by two things. One, of course, is COVID, and also China's very restrictive COVID policy. Another one is the collapse of the housing market. Both are quite severe, and the economy has been severely hit by both.
If the lockdowns were to be, let's say, stopped or released tomorrow, if we hypothetically say that, how fast can the Chinese economy bounce back?
Well, I think if the zero COVID policy is stopped, then the economy is going to bounce back very quickly. Look at, just between, say, two lockdowns, then we see a huge bouncing back of consumption, right?
Are you sure, though, that consumption will come back? Because will people still not be a little bit wary, and also businesses, because of the fear that maybe, as you say, perhaps 6 months of no lockdown, but then if something flares up again, it would make everything revert back to something where they couldn't go to work, they couldn't go to school.
Yeah, some of the consumption will need more time to come back, right? For example, if a store is closed, it takes time for new owners to come in, right? That's true. But in general, I think, people are so eager to do business, right? And people are so eager to do like a leisure travel, okay? So I believe if we can lift the COVID policy quickly, then most of the consumption will come back.
Now we're having an inflation problem all over the world. And in China, inflation is not that bad comparatively, but we have seen some pretty sharp spikes for individual goods. Let's say, for example, pork has gone up 20%. Is consumption going to come back if inflation is rising so much?
I don't think the inflation should be a big concern in China. Look at the PPI. It reached the peak actually in the middle of last year. In last year, people talked about stagflation in China. I said, no, wait a minute. I actually wish that China could have inflation. But it didn't happen. It didn't happen because of two reasons. So one, consumption was still at a low level. And on the other hand, we had so much redundant capacity on the production side, right? So all the cost of PPI inflation were just digested by the companies. Right? Of course, the smaller companies that suffered from the hike of the PPI. But in order to transfer the cost toward the consumption side, then we need consumption to come back. But we haven't seen that. So my understanding is that it's actually probably good if China could reach, say, 4%, 5% inflation. That means the consumption really comes back. but I don't think that's going to happen. Okay. Of course, the pork price is coming back. That's because of the cycle of pork. Okay, I don't think we need to worry that much.
What you're saying is quite ironic because the rest of the world is terrified of prices going up. And you're saying that it may not be such a bad thing for China if inflation actually comes up a little.
Yeah, exactly. It's, China's recovery has been kind of a mirror image of the Western and the rest of the world, right? So China's recovery comes from the production side. And in the rest of the world, it comes from consumption. Okay, so I really wish that China's consumption could rise up like the rest of the world.
Let's now move to the banking crisis in Henan, which is a very large province. It has a population of about 100 million, which for us in Southeast Asia is quite large. It's like a combination of Thailand and Malaysia put together. Is there a fundamental problem with the rural banks? Or is this really just a group of scammers, as some people argue, that there was corruption, that there was some involvement of organized crime? Which one is it?
Certainly there is a corruption, but in my view, I think the design of those rural banks, they're called village and the township banks, right? Intrinsically probably has some problems. Okay, think of the Asian financial crisis in Indonesia. Okay, and many of those banks collapsed basically because the owners or controllers of the banks tunneled money out of banks into their own pockets, right? So this is a problem in all countries. If we allow those small banks to exist, then you have to build a strong firewall to prevent tunneling. Okay, but I don't think that we have that kind of robust regulatory framework to prevent the tunneling. Henan case just rings the bell to regulators inside China. We have to strengthen the regulatory framework to prevent tunneling. If we cannot do that, probably we need to have a strong supervision on those banks. Probably we should restrict their savings, deposits policies, and also loan policies, right? So we cannot afford seeing those village and the township banks to continue the current practice.
Which would mean also for the village savers, or rather for people living in more rural areas, or perhaps the less sophisticated savers, they won't be able to expect such high interest rate accounts anymore.
Yeah, because those rural banks are difficult to get deposits. So they often offer very high deposit rates to attract the savings. That's actually quite dangerous because the rate of return to capital in China cannot be higher than 10%. If the promised saving rate higher than 10%, that doesn't make any sense. And that means a danger for the whole financial sector.
in the case of the mortgage boycott, we're having ordinary buyers of flats saying that they don't want to pay their mortgages anymore. Why has this happened?
I think it's because of the collapse of the housing market, right? Uh, so the government initially wanted to slow down the expansion of the credit in the housing market. I think the intention was correct, right? China wants to move towards innovation, and China wants to move investment into so-called real economy innovation. So we don't want to see that a lot of money goes to the financial sector or the housing market, right? But the government's policy was too quick, too severe, and that caused problems in the housing market. Many of those developers, even those healthy ones, didn't have enough liquidity, so they couldn't finish their apartment buildings, right? So that's why those home buyers said, wait a minute, we're not going to pay mortgage if my apartment is not going to be finished, right? So this is unique in China. People begin to pay their mortgage before they move into their apartment. Okay, basically, this is a financial vehicle for those developers to solve their liquidity problem. And so this is a very complicated issue because it's related to China's financial market, right? So the financial market doesn't give enough credit to developers, and the developers have to rely on the prepaid mortgage to get by.
How does this, though, square up, Professor, with the many luxury empty apartments that we're seeing in various big cities in China? Because on the one hand, you're saying that these apartments for poorer persons or working class persons haven't even been built or are far from being completed, and yet there has obviously been construction which is not being utilized.
Well, this is actually common in other countries, right? Like people in United States often own 2 or 3 houses in different cities, right? My advisor does that. He has a flat in Madison, Wisconsin. He has a flat in Davis, California. He also has a huge house in Sonoma County, right, in the middle of those vineyards, okay, because he loves wine. Of course, he has to leave at least 2 places idle, empty all the time, most of the time, okay? That's the same in China, right? That's a symbol of higher living standards.
But China is still a developing country. Many persons don't even have that flat, not the first one even.
Well, yes, I agree with you. Income distribution is so bad in China, but we cannot solve the income distribution problem by restricting people's ability to buy houses, right? We should go the other way around. That is to increase poor people's income capabilities so they can earn more income, so they can also afford 2 apartments in a city, in different cities.
Could China's slowdown mean a higher risk of recession for the rest of the world?
A slowdown in China has very large impact, at least for Southeast Asia, because now China's economy and the economy in Southeast Asia are so closely linked. Okay, China now export raw materials to Southeast Asia, and Southeast Asian countries produce final products to export them back to China and the rest of the world. So if China slows down, particularly if China's consumption slows down, that has a big impact on ASEAN countries. Okay, so I do hope that the Chinese economy can recover quickly.
One of the very crucial things about having high growth in China has always been about employment. It is because lots of people come out and need jobs, particularly, in fact, young people. And we're now seeing an unemployment rate which is at a record high for young people, close on 20%. How is China going to tackle that when it's got slow growth now?
Well, unemployment for young people, well, when we say young people, is between 18 and 24 years old. The unemployment rate for them has been always high because it's a transitional age period of time. Many people have just finished their higher education. They are trying to find a good job. So I actually don't worry that much. It's just this year we have the highest number of university graduates, and then this year's economy is not that good. But in the long run, I don't think that this is going to be a problem. I mean, first, the Chinese economy is going to recover next year. And second, China now is facing a huge retirement tide. We call retirement tide because China's baby boomers, most of them born between 1962 and 1976. Right? So this year is actually a very large year of retirement. And this is going to continue for the next 10 years. So the labor market is going to be good for young people.
Does this mean that the Chinese slowdown in the economy is not going to have any impact on the Chinese dream in the sense of having a good job, having a flat, maybe having a car? Is the Chinese dream still intact in spite of the slowdown that we're seeing?
Well, the China dream is still there. Right? This is only temporary. Right? Of course, it's quite prolonged. It's just because the pandemic doesn't disappear quickly. But in the long run, I still believe in the Chinese economy. You see this growth of technology in China, despite the technological ban from the United States. Let me just give you one example. That is the auto industry. This year, probably Chinese domestic makers will account for half of China's auto sales. That's the first time. That's very important, right? Chinese people now are buying Chinese cars. Okay. If you look at EVs, domestic car makers just dominant, not just in China, but also in the world. In Europe, Chinese makers account for 10% of EVs in Europe, right? So last year, China's EV sales was almost 60% of world total, the 6 times of United States. Okay, this year, many of the EV makers have doubled their sales. Okay, so you can see that China's EV industry is booming. I believe in 10 years' time, China's EV industry is going to repeat what Japanese car makers did in the 1980s. that is, China's EVs will just go out of China and occupy a large share of the world market.
Are you optimistic or pessimistic about the Chinese economy?
Actually, for China's long-term growth prospects, I'm always optimistic. But for the current situation, the short-term outlook, I'm only cautiously optimistic. I hope that the government can do more to find out a more scientific way toward COVID, and also to quickly revert the collapse of the housing market.
Prof. Yao, thank you very much for talking to us in Conversation.
Thank you very much.